All right, so get this. We're going to dive into something a little unexpected today.
Oh.
The button. Like, remember actual buttons?
Yeah. Like in a world of touchscreens, who would have thought?
Right. But they're making a comeback.
Really?
Yeah, big time. We're talking like a full-on resurgence.
That's pretty interesting.
I know. We dug into this interview with Rachel Plotnick. She's a professor who studies how people and tech, interact. And it was an IE spectrum. And get this, she calls it rebuttonization.
Rebuttonization.
I know, catchy, right?
Yeah, kinda.
So her research shows it's happening everywhere. Like even Apple is adding buttons back to iPhones.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And it's not just phones. Appliances are going back to knobs. Cars are bringing back dials. It's wild.
It's just like we're hitting rewind on the whole touchscreen takeover thing.
That's exactly what Plotnick is saying. And she makes a good point. It's not just nostalgia. There are some solid reasons for this shift back to buttons.
Like what?
Well, one biggie is what she calls touchscreen fatigue.
Touchscreen fatigue.
Yeah, think about it. We're constantly swiping, tapping, scrolling. I mean, how much time do you spend on your phone every day?
Oh, way too much, probably.
Right. It can be exhausting.
Yeah, true.
And in some cases, like driving, touchscreens can be downright dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely had those moments where I'm like fumbling with my phone while I'm driving, and it's scary.
It is. So buttons are coming back, at least in part, to address those downsides.
That makes sense.
Plotnick highlights a few key advantages of buttons. First, tactile feedback. That feeling of actually pressing something.
Yeah. The click or the push, you actually know you did something.
Right. Touchscreens just can't replicate that.
It's true. There's something very satisfying about, flipping a light switch versus tapping a touchscreen. That physical confirmation.
Totally. So what else? Why buttons?
Well, they're also easier to use without looking, which is obviously crucial for safety and accessibility, too.
Oh, for sure.
Like, think about adjusting your car's climate control.
Okay, yeah.
With a button, you can do it by feel. But with a touchscreen, you need to actually look at it, take your eyes off the road.
And that can be a recipe for disaster.
Exactly.
So buttons give you a level of control and precision that touchscreens sometimes just can't match.
Yeah, and Plotnick also pointed out something that I thought was pretty interesting. Buttons can actually be more expressive.
More expressive. How so?
Because they're physical, right? They offer this whole range of tactile experiences like the click of a keyboard, the resistance of a good knob. You don't get that with a touchscreen.
That's a really good point. This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Okay, tell me.
So you mentioned that Plotnick also did research on the historical anxieties and pleasures associated with buttons.
Oh, yeah. That was fascinating.
But what did she find?
Well, buttons have always been kind of a source of both fascination and fear, Like, think about it. They represent our ability to interact with tech, to make things happen. And that can be empowering, but also a little unnerving.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like a trigger.
Right. It sets a process in motion.
And sometimes you don't know what the outcome will be.
Exactly. And her research suggests this uncertainty has, always been part of our relationship with buttons.
That makes sense.
Like, that classic image of someone hesitating before pressing a big red button?
Oh, yeah.
It's symbolic, right? Like the power, but also potential danger of technology.
Yeah, it makes you think, that whole do not press button thing.
Exactly. Our curiosity, but also that fear of the unknown.
Totally. And that fear isn't always irrational either.
Definitely not. I mean, buttons have literally launched rockets, detonated bombs.
Right. Shut down power grids.
It's no wonder we have this this complex relationship with them.
This is all so fascinating.
I know, right?
But obviously buttons aren't like a perfect solution for everything. Are there times when touchscreens might actually be better?
Oh, for sure. Plotnick acknowledges that, buttons aren't a cure-all.
Right.
Sometimes touchscreens offer more simplicity, more flexibility.
Yeah, like navigating a big menu or something.
Right. A touchscreen can display way more options than a bunch of buttons.
True. Or like a defibrillator in an emergency.
Oh, that's a good example.
Speed and clarity are essential. A touchscreen might actually be safer, more intuitive.
Yeah, sometimes you need to limit choices, have clear visuals.
Right. So it's not like buttons versus touchscreens.
No, it's more about finding the right interface for the task.
Exactly. Plotnick seems to be a big advocate for having options,
Definitely.
like different ways of interacting with tech.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach.
This all leads to a question I'm really curious about.
Yeah.
What can we learn from the history of buttons to inform the design of, future interfaces.
Oh, that's where her research gets really insightful. It turns out there's a lot we can learn from the past.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, progress isn't always linear.
What do you mean?
Like, sometimes older tech is actually better suited for certain tasks.
So newer isn't always better.
Right. Her research suggests that in the past, there was more emphasis on simplicity, user-friendliness, especially with controls.
Oh, interesting.
Like, we might have gotten a little carried away with bells and whistles in our quest for, the next big thing.
It's like we've come full circle.
Exactly. We embraced complexity, and now we're realizing that simplicity and intuitiveness are just as important.
Exactly. And that realization is kind of driving this whole rebuttonization trend.
Yeah. It's not just nostalgia, it's about rediscovering the value of tactile feedback, simplicity, and control. In a world that's honestly just getting more and more complex and overwhelming.
This is also thought-provoking. I'm like looking at the buttons around me differently now.
I bet you are. It's amazing how this simple object can reveal so much about our relationship with tech and, our evolving needs as humans.
Speaking of needs, let's dive into another layer of this story. Plotnik has been working with companies, helping them design better tactile controls. And this is where it gets really interesting. Medical device manufacturers.
Oh, wow. Medical devices. That's unexpected.
I know. Tell me more about that.
It turns out that even in life-saving situations, people can hesitate to push buttons.
Really?
Imagine you're in a hospital, you see this big red button on a piece of equipment. It can be intimidating.
Oh, yeah. Even if I knew it was the right thing to do, I'd probably hesitate.
Right. So what kind of insights has she offered these companies?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, one key thing she emphasizes is understanding the psychology, like the human factors that influence how people interact with tech, especially in high-stress situations.
So it's not just about designing a button that works mechanically. It's about designing one that people feel comfortable using.
Exactly. And that involves thinking about things like the size, the shape, the color, the labeling.
Wow, all those little details?
Even the placement on the device.
The balance, right? Like functionality, but also psychology.
Exactly. And Professor Plotnik is helping these companies achieve that balance.
I'm really eager to hear more about her specific recommendations. Like, what kind of strategies does she suggest?
One thing she advocates for is incorporating clear instructions.
Right, yeah.
Maybe even visual cues to guide people.
Like step by step.
Exactly. It's about reducing cognitive overload in a high-pressure situation.
So it's like having a voice guiding you.
Right. Instead of just facing this, daunting button with all these potential consequences swirling around in your head.
Right, right.
And she also recommends addressing the issue of authority directly.
What do you mean?
Well, people might hesitate because they don't feel qualified or authorized.
Oh, I see.
So how do you design a button that empowers the user, reassures them they're capable?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Well, you can include messages that validate their decision. Even something as simple as, "You are doing the right thing," can make a huge difference.
It's amazing how these small design choices can really impact the user experience.
It really is. And that's why her work is so valuable. She's helping us understand that good design isn't just about aesthetics or function. It's about understanding the human element.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. I never realized how much psychology goes into the design of, everyday objects.
Yeah.
Especially those we rely on in critical situations.
It's a fascinating field of study, and Professor Plotnik is clearly a leading voice in this area.
I can't wait to hear more about what else she has to say about all of this.
Yeah.
This rebuttonization trend is proving to be much more complex and thought-provoking than I initially imagined.
I agree, and what's particularly intriguing is how this trend reflects a broader shift in our relationship with technology.
Oh.
In what way?
Well, I think it signals a growing awareness of the importance of the tactile experience.
Okay.
For years, the focus has been on making technology as sleek and minimalist as possible, often at the expense of, the sense of touch.
It's like we were so enamored with the idea of a purely digital world
Exactly.
that we forgot about the importance of our physical senses. But now we're realizing we're missing something.
What's that?
That feeling of connection, of control, of being grounded in the physical world.
And buttons, with their, satisfying clicks, their tactile feedback, they're a way to bring some of that back.
It's almost like a counter movement to the dominance of touchscreens.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about buttons, right?
No, it's not.
Like, we're seeing this trend in the growing popularity of handmade goods, artisanal crafts, things that have a story behind them. objects that connect us to the past, the people who made them.
Yeah, right.
There's a sense of authenticity, of connection that you just don't get from mass-produced stuff.
Exactly. I think that this appreciation for the handmade is a reaction to the increasing digitization of our lives.
That makes sense.
It's a way of reclaiming a sense of agency, of control, in a world where so much feels automated, impersonal.
So it's not just about bringing back buttons or embracing handmade objects. It's about finding a better balance, right?
Exactly.
Between the digital and the physical, the virtual and the real.
And I think that's a really important message for our listeners to take away from this conversation.
Absolutely.
Technology is powerful, but it shouldn't come at the expense of our human experience.
I couldn't agree more. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I'm already starting to look at my relationship with technology in a whole new light. And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so. And I hope this conversation inspires them to pay more attention to the tactile world around them, to really savor the feeling of a button click, the texture of a piece of fabric, the warmth of a handshake.
Those are all such simple pleasures, but they're so important to our well-being.
They are.
It's about remembering that technology should enhance our lives, not replace them.
Exactly. And that the future of technology isn't predetermined. It's something we create together through our choices, our values, and our imaginations.
That's a powerful message. So before we move on, I'd love to hear more about Professor Plotnick's work with these medical device companies. It's a really fascinating example of how design can influence behavior, especially in those, high-stakes situations.
It's a perfect illustration of how even the smallest design choices can have a profound impact on how people interact with technology.
Well, let's dive into that next.
So Plotnick, she actually shared this story about working with a company that designs defibrillators.
Defibrillators.
Yeah. And it kind of highlights, how psychology and design, they can intersect in some pretty unexpected ways.
Okay, so defibrillators, the things that, restart someone's heart.
Right.
Those seem pretty straightforward, right?
Right.
Like in an emergency, you wouldn't think anyone would hesitate to use one?
You'd think so. But talking to this company, she found this surprising obstacle.
What's that?
Even in a life or death situation, people can freeze up.
Really?
Yeah, and struggle to actually push the button.
Wow, that's kind of unsettling.
It is.
So why is that? Why the hesitation when someone's life is literally on the line?
It's a mix of things, but fear is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of making a mistake, Like, what if they do something wrong, make the situation worse?
Okay.
In that moment of crisis, that button represents this, enormous decision, and people worry about the consequences.
Makes sense, yeah. You don't want to accidentally harm the person you're trying to help.
Exactly. And there's also that question of authority.
What authority?
Yeah, people might doubt their own ability to use the device correctly or feel like it's not their place to intervene,
So it's not just about the tech itself.
No, it's
like the whole social and emotional context around it.
Exactly. And that's where Plotnick's expertise is so valuable. She helps these companies understand these complex human factors to design devices that are not only functional, but also feel safe and empowering to use.
That's so important.
It is.
So I'm really curious, for this defibrillator company, what did she recommend? How do you design to address those psychological barriers?
Well, one thing she suggests is, clear instructions. Maybe even using visual cues.
Yeah.
To guide people through the process step by step.
Oh, like a checklist or something.
Kind of, yeah. It's about reducing that cognitive overload in a high-stress situation.
So it's like having that, reassuring voice guiding you instead of just this button with all these potential consequences.
Exactly. She also recommends addressing that issue of authority head on.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe by including messages that, validate the user's decision.
Is the label.
Something as simple as, you are doing the right thing.
Huh.
Can actually make a huge difference.
That's pretty amazing how something so small can really impact someone's confidence, their willingness to act.
Yeah, it's a reminder that good design isn't just about making something work. It's about making people feel capable, empowered to use it.
And that applies to way more than just defibrillators.
Oh, absolutely. Any tech where, human action decision-making is critical.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to, the psychology behind design.
Yeah.
I never realized how much thought goes into those, seemingly simple interactions that we have with everyday objects, especially in those critical situations.
It's really a testament to the depth of Plotnick's work. It's not just about buttons, touchscreens. It's about how we interact with technology as humans.
And it makes you think about the responsibility that comes with designing tech, especially when it can have, life or death consequences.
For sure.
We need to be so mindful of that human element and how our creations can really impact people on an emotional level, psychological level.
Absolutely. Technologies, it's such an integral part of our lives now. It shapes how we communicate, how we receive medical care, everything. And as it keeps evolving, it's more important than ever to think about those human implications.
You mentioned earlier that this whole rebuttonization trend, it might be part of a larger cultural shift. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. I think it reflects this growing desire for tactile experiences in a world that's, becomes so dominated by screens, virtual interactions. We're seeing a renewed appreciation for things that are handmade.
Yeah.
For the imperfections, the unique qualities that come with things made by, well, human hands.
You're right. I've noticed myself being drawn to things with, like, texture.
Yeah.
Things that feel real, substantial.
Right.
It's almost like a counterbalance to the sleekness and uniformity of so much modern tech.
Exactly. And it's not just aesthetics. It's about reclaiming a sense of agency, of control in a world that can often feel very automated and impersonal. Think about the rise of custom-built keyboards.
Oh, yeah.
People are spending a lot of money for a keyboard that's meticulously crafted with custom switches, keycaps.
I've seen those. They're like works of art.
They are.
And the people who build them are so passionate about that tactile experience.
It's not just typing, right? It's the feeling of each keystroke, the sound, the responsiveness.
It's about creating a more intimate, personalized experience.
Exactly. It reflects their preferences, their values. And that desire for personalization, it goes beyond keyboards.
Oh, yeah. Like where else?
Well, look at 3D printing, right? People can design, create objects tailored to their specific needs.
It's like taking back control.
Right.
Instead of being these, passive consumers of mass-produced technology, people are becoming creators, makers, tinkerers.
And that shift, I think, is really exciting. It's about recognizing that technology can be more than just a tool. It can be an extension of ourselves, a reflection of our creativity, our individuality.
This conversation has taken us on quite a journey.
I know, right?
From the psychology of pushing a button to these broader cultural implications of this rebuttonization trend.
It's fascinating.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah.
So what else did Professor Plotnick have to say in her interview? Did she talk about anything else that you found particularly interesting?
Well, she made this really insightful observation about the cyclical nature of innovation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So often what we perceive as new is actually just a reimagining or a reinterpretation of something that already existed.
Oh, like fashion trends? What's old is new again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she uses buttons as a perfect example. In the early days of computing, there was this huge excitement about buttons.
Buttons.
Yeah. They were seen as this way to revolutionize how we interact with machines.
So buttons were once at the forefront of innovation.
Oh, absolutely. And her research actually uncovered this really rich history of buttons dating back centuries. And their evolution mirrors the evolution of technology itself.
That's fascinating to think about buttons having this this long and storied past,
Right.
shaping how we interact with the world.
And it's kind of ironic, isn't it?
What's that?
That the graphical user interface, the GUI,
Right.
which was initially seen as a way to move beyond buttons, has now become so ubiquitous that we're actually starting to yearn for the tactile feedback, the simplicity of, buttons.
It's like we took this detour into the digital realm, exploring all the possibilities of touchscreens, virtual interfaces.
Right.
And now we're kind of circling back
Yeah.
to appreciate the value of the physical, the tactile, the button.
And it really speaks to the importance of not getting too caught up in the hype of the new, right? Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that have stood the test of time.
So maybe progress isn't always about inventing something totally new,
Yeah.
but about rediscovering, adapting what already works, what feels right, what resonates with our human nature.
That's a very insightful way to put it, and it challenges us to look beyond the shiny surface of new technologies and think about the deeper human needs that are really driving innovation.
This is making me think about all those other, forgotten technologies, design principles that might be waiting to be rediscovered and reimagined for, the 21st century.
Yep.
What else can we learn from the past to inform the future of technology?
That's a great question. And one that I think Professor Plotnick would definitely encourage us to explore. She's a firm believer in the power of history to, illuminate the present and guide us towards a more human-centered future.
This whole conversation has been a real journey of discovery for me,
I know, me too.
and I'm sure our listeners are feeling equally inspired.
I hope so.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more aspect I'd love to explore.
Okay.
This idea of a tactile renaissance.
Ah, yes. That's a term Professor Plotnick uses
Right.
to describe this growing awareness of the importance of touch, of texture in our lives.
It's something we've been talking about throughout our conversation.
We have.
But I'd love to hear more about the specific ways this trend is showing up in design.
Okay.
What are some of the most interesting examples you've come across?
Well, one area where we're seeing a lot of experimentation is in materials, textures. Like, some companies are incorporating soft touch finishes into their product.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed that on some of my gadgets.
Right. It makes them more pleasant to hold, to use.
Definitely. There's a warmth, a sense of connection that you just don't get from, cold, hard plastic.
Exactly. And some companies are going even further,
How so?
incorporating different textures to create like a multi-sensory experience.
Like what? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine a smartphone with a textured back that feels like woven fabric, or a laptop with a keyboard that mimics the feel of a vintage typewriter.
Oh, wow.
These designs engage our sense of touch in a more nuanced, deliberate way.
It's like they're inviting us to slow down and really savor the experience of using these objects.
Right, instead of just swiping and tapping mindlessly.
And this isn't just limited to, electronics, right?
No.
Like, where else are we seeing this?
Well, we're seeing it in furniture design, automotive design, even architecture.
Wow, that's incredible. So it really is a broad movement.
It is.
Towards incorporating tactile experiences into, all aspects of our lives.
I think it speaks to this deeper human need.
Fair.
Connection, grounding, a sense of presence in a world that's, becoming increasingly virtual, abstract.
This is all so inspiring. It makes me want to go out and experience the world with, all of my senses.
I encourage you to do so. It's a wonderful way to reconnect with the richness and complexity of the physical world.
This deep dive into the world of buttons has turned out to be so much more than I expected.
Me too.
It's led us down this fascinating path, exploring the history of technology, the psychology of design,
Right.
and this enduring power of human touch.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. But before we move on to our final thoughts, I'd love to hear more about your perspective on this whole, tactile renaissance.
Okay.
What do you think it means for the future of technology, of design?
Well, I think it signals a really exciting shift, for years, we were almost obsessed with making technology disappear, making it as sleek and minimalist as possible. But now there's this recognition that we actually crave those tactile experiences, that feeling of connection to the physical world.
Yeah, it's like we went all in on the digital, and now we're realizing, hey, maybe we threw the baby out with the bathwater. So does this mean the end of touchscreens then?
Professor Plotnick doesn't see it as a battle between buttons and touch screens at all. It's more about understanding the strengths of each and using them in ways that complement each other.
So having physical buttons for those essential controls in a car, but still having a touchscreen for navigation or entertainment.
Exactly. It's about creating a more, holistic and engaging experience where technology adapts to us rather than the other way around. And there's some really cool innovations coming out that could really blur those lines between the digital and the physical.
Oh, do tell. I'm all ears.
Okay, so Plotnick mentioned that companies are working on some really advanced haptic feedback technology.
Haptic feedback.
Yeah, you know how your phone vibrates now? Imagine that, but way more sophisticated. You could actually feel textures on your screen or the sensation of turning a knob, even though it's, just a flat surface.
Whoa, that's wild. So feeling the grain of wood or the ridges of a dial all through a touch screen.
Exactly. And it could revolutionize how we interact with everything. Our phones, our appliances, even our cars.
It's like science fiction coming to life. Yeah. But it makes sense, right? We're tactile creatures at heart. Even when we're in the digital world, we still crave that physical feedback.
Totally. And the possibilities are pretty much endless. As we understand more about the brain and how we process sensory information, who knows what kind of amazing interfaces we'll be able to create.
This whole conversation has been so mind-blowing. It's made me realize that we're not just, passive users of technology. We're active participants in shaping its evolution. And the choices we make as designers, as consumers, as humans, Those choices will determine what the future of technology looks and feels like.
That's a powerful thought, and it's really at the heart of what Professor Plotnick's work is all about, you know? Challenging us to be more mindful of our relationship with technology, to recognize that it's not just about functionality, it's about how it makes us feel, how it connects us to the world around us.
So as we wrap up this incredible dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Hmm. I think it's that technology is constantly evolving, and so are we, but at the end of the day, it's all about people, you know? Designing for human needs, for connection, for joy, for a sense of wonder. And sometimes the simplest things, like the satisfying click of a button, can remind us of that essential truth.
Beautifully said. So to our listeners, I hope this has sparked some curiosity about the often overlooked world of buttons and how our relationship with technology is constantly evolving. As you go about your day, take a moment to really notice the buttons around you, how they feel, how they sound, how they make you feel. You might be surprised by what you discover. Until next time.